Hey everyone! We're about to dive into something that humanity has been doing forever, facing our fears. We've always had monsters, right? But what's really fascinating is how the idea of a monster, what truly scares us, has evolved over the centuries. So, let me ask you something right off the bat, just to get us started. What's scarier to you? The monster you can actually see and put a name to? Or the one you can't? The one that's just some unseen horror lurking in the dark? It's a simple question, but it gets to the heart of a basic human need, our obsession with defining the things that terrify us.
For hundreds of years in rural Sri Lanka, this was the ultimate unnamed terror. They called it the devil bird. Nobody ever claimed to have seen one. All they knew was its sound, a horrifying human-like scream in the middle of the night. And if you heard that shriek, it meant someone you knew was about to die. It was just pure mythological horror.
But then, pretty recently, in 2001, biologists finally figured it out. They identified the source of the sound. This mythical omen of death was a real animal, the spot-bellied eagle owl, to be exact. It's this huge bird of prey with a call that sounds unbelievably, unsettlingly human. And right there, that's the perfect setup for what we're talking about today. What happens when we can finally drag our monsters out into the light and give them a name? Okay, so let's shift from a monster of myth to a monster that's very, very real and entirely man-made: war. You've heard the saying, right? All is fair in love and war? Well, it turns out humanity has never actually bought into that. Not really.
And here's the crazy part. Even in the most brutal, ancient times, when you'd think life was cheap, different societies all felt this deep need to write a rule book for their most hellish activity. They were desperately trying to draw a line between what was necessary and what was just plain cruel.
And this wasn't some new idea that just popped up. You can draw a straight line through history, from ancient Indian concepts of a righteous war to the unwritten rules of the Greeks, all the way to modern laws we still use today. Trying to tame this monster has been a human project for millennia.
Take one of the absolute earliest examples, from way back around 600 BCE in ancient India. Their principles of Dharma Yuddha were honestly pretty incredible. They insisted on fairness, like a guy in a chariot can only fight another guy in a chariot, one-on-one. They demanded mercy, saying you couldn't attack soldiers who were asleep or trying to surrender, and get this, they even required that you treat your wounded enemy.
And the ancient Greeks, they had a very similar playbook. Their common laws were more like an unwritten gentleman's agreement, but the goal was the same: bring some order to the chaos. You had to officially declare war, you had to respect truces for things like the Olympic Games, and you had to treat the enemy's dead with a certain level of respect. It was all about putting limits on brutality, at least when they were fighting each other.
But as civilizations got bigger and built stronger armies and higher walls, a whole new kind of monster started to show up. And this one wasn't some enemy soldier you'd meet on the battlefield. No, this one was way scarier, because this monster looked exactly like us.
Suddenly, the whole horror story changed. The monster wasn't a devil bird in the jungle anymore. It was a powerful, respected noble hiding behind the thick walls of a castle, using their status and their money to hide the terrible things they were doing. Let's talk about two of the most infamous examples from history. So, meet Gilles de Rais. If you lived in 15th century France, this guy was a superstar, a decorated war hero who literally fought alongside Joan of Arc. He came from one of the richest families in the country. On the outside, he was the absolute picture of nobility and courage.
But inside his castle, a completely different story was playing out. He was eventually accused of kidnapping, torturing, and murdering over 100 young boys, usually by luring them in with promises of a job or a meal. This had nothing to do with war. This was just cruelty for its own sake.
Fast forward about a century, and we find another one of these noble monsters, Elizabeth Bathory. And just like Gilles de Rais, she was born into incredible power and wealth in Hungary, protected by one of the most powerful families around.
And what she supposedly did with that power, it's pure nightmare fuel. They called her the Blood Countess. The story goes that she tortured and killed up to 650 young servant girls over decades because she believed bathing in their blood would keep her young. These weren't mythological creatures, they were real people hiding in plain sight.
All right, let's jump way forward into the modern era, because this is where things get really interesting. We see this bizarre split. We've kept up that ancient project of making rules for old horrors, but at the exact same time, we've gotten scarily good at inventing brand new ones.
And this is the central paradox of our time, isn't it? On one hand, we've taken thousands of years of customs and finally perfected the rulebook for war, creating this incredible system of international law. But on the other hand, our scientific genius has cooked up new monsters that our ancestors couldn't have even imagined.
I mean, just think about a modern monster born in a lab. Pyros. This is the chemical class behind what people know as bath salts. They are, by all accounts, some of the most addictive, most destructive chemicals ever created by humans. It's a brand new kind of horror, designed by science.
And yet, in that exact same modern era, we created this, the Geneva Conventions. This is the absolute peak of that thousands-year-long effort to write down rules for mercy. It explicitly outlaws the exact kind of cruelty that used to be normal in war, and it protects the very people who were always the main victims: civilians, medics, prisoners.
And we didn't just write down the rules this time, we added consequences. Things like the Nuremberg Principles and the Geneva Conventions work together. They don't just say what's unacceptable in war. They create a system to hold people accountable when they cross that line. For the first time ever, there was a global system in place to punish our monsters.
So where does all this leave us? We've gone from mythical birds and ancient battles to serial-killing nobles and designer drugs. It seems totally chaotic, but there is one powerful unifying thread that connects every single one of these stories.
This quote really nails it. It doesn't matter if it's a rule against using poisoned arrows back in 600 BCE or a global ban on torture in 1949. The goal has always been the same. It's this constant human drive to reduce suffering wherever we can, to draw a line in the sand against pure, unchecked cruelty.
So yeah, the face of fear is always changing. One day, the monster is a sound in the dark. The next, it's an invading army. Then, it's the rich guy down the road with a dark secret or a chemical someone cooked up in a lab. The what we're afraid of is always evolving. But how we react, that's been incredibly consistent. We seem to have this built-in need to investigate our fears, to give them a name, to write rules to contain them, and to try to force some control over the chaos they bring. That drive, that seems to be a permanent part of the human condition.
So that leaves us with one final thought. Our ancestors made up rules for bronze swords and monsters and castles. We're busy making them for things like cyber warfare and international crime. So what are the unnamed monsters of our own time? And what new rules are we creating right now that future generations will look back on